Hey, Art, I just have to report you were saying something about the oil prices at 88. It's now down to $86.42 a barrel. That's $3.61 off its high.
There you
So, it's just going to continue. And the market, I just saw it closed around 929 today. Big move. So,
Wow. Good.
Yeah.
That's good news.
A lot of optimism out there.
Yeah, we are the purveyor of good news here. We don't just want to talk about negative headlines.
Well, I'm excited about talking about today because, as you say, it's like, okay, people are buying. First-time home buyers are really back into the market. And, okay, so what are the buyers seeing that the experts who are naysayers seeing? I think that's the big thing.
Well, I think you're right. And yeah, I like how you put the experts in air quotes, because I don't know about you. I am really gotten fatigued in reading so many articles, especially in the financial part of the world, and other parts too, where so many writers of these articles make reference to experts without really being specific about who the heck are these experts. I can say I'm an expert. I've at least been around the business for a long time, but it's just so interesting because we're led to believe that we should just trust what these experts are saying when they're being quoted without being named. And so it gets a little, I'm a skeptical type anyway. And so I really get a little bit frustrated with that. But to answer this question, what I think is going on, or at least what I want to believe is going on, is that maybe we're starting to see a little bit of a breakthrough with the general public out there who have been getting pounded with these headlines and all this negative news for so long that I think some portion of them are finally taking the time to really delve into what's really going on. Because we've had this steady drumbeat for such a long time about the fact that home prices continue to be elevated. They're at record highs. Mortgage rates are at record highs. They're still elevated. And the implication is that that's just continuing. Mm-hmm. But what I want to believe is that these folks, that 4.17 that got out there and bought a home in May, said, well, wait a minute. Yeah, that's what the headline's telling me, but what am I really seeing? So I'm hoping some of them did their homework and looked at some of the data that we try to show here every week, like what's really been going on with bond yields. If they look at our website, what's really been going on with mortgage rates over the last several months. And I think what they're going to see, what they are seeing, is that, yes, while there's been a trend higher in mortgage rates and bond yields in the springtime, I think they're realizing that is directly associated with the geopolitical situation. So from that perspective, I think they're realizing or accepting that this is probably transitory. It's not indicative of a long-term trend. And then I think if they've done any, most folks, if you're going to buy a home, actually anymore, if you're going to buy anything, what do? You get online, you Google things and, see what's out there, and you kind of do your pre-shopping online, right? I have a feeling some more of these buyers are doing that, and they're going, well, wait a minute. Mortgage rates are still, low sixes, 6 1/8, 6 1/4. Well, I remember they were that low 5 months ago, 6 months ago. Hopefully if they looked at our rate grid, they would remember, well, gosh, it wasn't that many months ago. I could get a loan from MortgageWorks at 5 3/4. So I think part of what's going on is they're realizing that despite the headlines, despite the negative news, that mortgage rates, to the extent they've moved around and trended a little bit higher, the trend has been in a narrow range, what I call a narrow trading range. It's not like we've gone from 6 to 7 to 8. It's been relatively muted in terms of the movement, on the upside, and then it kind of hits a plateau. I mean, we've been kind of stuck at a 4.5 10-year bond yield for some time now, plus or minus. So I think that's part of it. And the other thing I think they're realizing is that mortgage rates, even right now, even with the elevation that occurred since the Iran war started, they're still better than they were a year ago. Yeah. And they're still a lot better than they were about 2.5 years ago. But you don't hear that, you don't hear that in the headlines enough. And I think those who are willing to do their homework are going, aha, wait a minute, it ain't so bad out there. So I'm going to try to ignore all this noise and go out there and kick some tires and, talk to some agents and maybe hopefully somebody like us where we can give them what's really going on. And then they're going to realize, well, things aren't so bad. And the economy is, again, despite all the negative news about the economy and the administration's getting poor marks and all these polls about how badly they're handling the economy, most of the economic data is actually pretty strong. And that trickles down to folks who, are wage earners or business owners. Incomes are actually pretty strong out there. We've been talking about how wage growth has kept up with even these elevated inflation numbers, maybe with the exception of May. Otherwise, wage numbers have kept up. And in fact, we've had real net wage growth even after you factor in these inflation numbers. So what I think some of these people are realizing is, hey, I'm making a pretty good living. And after I checked into it, I'm surprised to find out, yeah, I can afford these numbers. I can afford these rates. I can afford this payment. Maybe I'm not totally happy about that, but if I want to move forward, not get stuck being a renter forever, I need to bite the bullet and take advantage because it ain't so bad. I can actually do this. And so I think that's part of what's going on. And same thing with home prices. Over and over, we keep hearing home prices are too high. They're too high. They're elevated. They're going to keep going up. That's true. But as we've talked on the show for a while, the rate of increase has definitely slowed. It hasn't gone negative in any widespread areas or over the country for sure. I mean, there's a few pockets here and there, but overall, the increase in home prices has moderated a fair amount. And so when you put all that together, I think that's why some of these buyers have realized that, you know what, the conditions aren't so bad. And it's time for me to really take a look at that. And when they did, they're seeing an opportunity and they've jumped on it. So I think the data is supporting that.
Well, Art, it feels like that story about the big bad wolf. There's a wolf coming, and somebody is on the hill saying, "The wolf is coming. The wolf is coming."
Right.
And so everybody batten down the hatches, and then it's like, no wolf. And as you say, we don't just depend on somebody on the hill anymore or an expert to tell us how we're supposed to think.
Right.
And when let's be honest, when we're living in an apartment and we have one extra child in one less bedroom, the pressure and the reality of, hey, we need to move into a bigger place becomes in play. And all of a sudden, then we start researching for ourselves and say, wait a second, I've got a job that is very solid. My income is going up. I'm making more money than it is with inflation. And as you say, I can afford this. And right. So it's like, I'm not dependent on somebody else to influence me. You do think that's part of it?
I think it is, and that, of course, when you say that and you say they're realizing that they don't need to be influenced by, some of these reports and the headlines and so forth. Of course, I start thinking about influencers, which I'm going to sound like an old guy, but I still have never gotten my head around what that is and why it is that those folks maybe I'm being kind of envious, jealous almost, because some of these influencers are making a pretty darn good living too, right? And I'm like, how can that be? I mean, are people really living their life based on influencers? I can't get my head around that. But anyway, I'm sounding like an old guy, but the point, there's an underlying point there. I'm hopeful that some, like that May existing home sale number is reflective of the fact that folks are maybe realizing it's time to do your own research, do your own homework, ignore the headlines and the influencers, and make your own informed decisions and have the intellectual curiosity to seek out the information you need to make a rational, reasonable, and beneficial decision for your life going forward. And I think that's starting to happen more than we've seen in the past.